My name is George Bennett, and I always believed family was everything. For most of my life, I dedicated myself to providing for my wife and children. At 58, I thought I'd earned the right to relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I'd worked hard, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, and now, as I entered my retirement years, I thought I could finally take a step back and breathe. But life, as it often does, had a different plan for me. It started one quiet Sunday evening when my daughter Emma and her husband Tom called me into the living room. I could sense something was off when I walked in. They were sitting on the couch, looking at me with an unsettling seriousness that sent a ripple of unease through me. I had always been there for Emma. I'd paid for her college, helped with the down payment on her first house, and supported her financially whenever she needed it. I thought I had earned the right to a peaceful relationship with her, but that night I would learn just how wrong I was. Either you support Tom's business or you leave, Emma said, her voice tight and laced with authority. Her eyes were no longer the ones I remembered from when she was a child, those eyes that were always filled with trust and love. Now they were cold, almost calculating. I didn't respond at first. I couldn't. A part of me was stunned, unsure if I had heard her correctly. I had spent my entire life putting my family first, but now, in my time of need, my daughter was giving me an ultimatum. I thought back to all the sacrifices I'd made for her and Tom. I had poured my savings into their wedding, helped them get started in life, and yet here they were, treating me like a burden. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I had always thought Emma and I had a bond, one that transcended money and material things. But this moment shattered that illusion. I thought back to all those years I'd spent working overtime at the bank to pay off their wedding bills, to help them buy their home, and to cover any other financial woes they had. It wasn't the first time I'd made sacrifices for my family, but it was the first time it had been thrown back in my face so bluntly. I didn't argue, didn't plead for understanding, didn't try to reason with her. Instead, I smiled, an empty smile, but a smile nonetheless. I had to remind myself that I was no longer the man who would bend down over backward to make everyone happy at the expense of my own well-being. I stood up slowly, gathering my thoughts, and grabbed my suitcase from the hallway. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll leave." Emma didn't stop me. Tom, of course, didn't say a word. They expected me to break down, to beg them for forgiveness and promise that I would change. But this time, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I had spent too long being manipulated, too long putting everyone's needs before my own. This was it. I could hear Emma calling after me as I walked down the hallway, but I didn't stop. I had made my choice. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity. The house I had helped build, the home I had worked for, it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a prison, one where I had been trapped by the expectations of others. As I walked out the door, the weight of the situation didn't quite hit me. I think I was still in shock, still processing the fact that my own daughter had made me choose between my integrity and my place in her life. But as I reached the curb, suitcase in hand, it started to sink in. My heart pounded in my chest, not from anger but from the realization that I was finally free from the suffocating grip of emotional manipulation. I had a small apartment lined up, one I had rented in the days leading up to this decision, just in case. I wasn't going to be a burden, even to myself. It wasn't a glamorous place, but it would do. It was mine, and that was enough. The drive to my new place was long, and as I turned the corner onto the quiet street, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. But it wasn't sadness. It was relief. The apartment was small, modest, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by my role as the provider. I was just George. Alone, but not lonely. The next few days passed slowly. I didn't hear from Emma at first, and I didn't reach out to her. There were a lot of unanswered questions in my mind, but there was also clarity. I had spent too much time giving to others without asking for anything in return, without setting boundaries, and it had finally caught up to me. The silence between us wasn't deafening. It was peaceful. It gave me time to think, to process everything I had just experienced. The guilt that had always gnawed at me, the guilt of not being able to say no, of not being able to walk away when things were wrong, began to fade. and as it faded, I found space to breathe again. A week passed. I got 18 missed calls from Emma. She left messages, some frantic, some pleading, some with quiet desperation. But I didn't respond. It wasn't because I didn't care about her, but because I had to stick to my decision. For too long, I had been the one giving. Now it was their turn to figure things out without me. As I unpacked my things in the small apartment, I glanced at the phone one last time. Emma's name flashed on the screen again. I didn't even pick it up. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't that I didn't miss my family. It was that I had finally learned to live for myself. The first few days in my new apartment were unsettling. The silence echoed in the small, sparsely furnished space. It wasn't like the emptiness I'd felt when my wife Martha passed away. Back then, the quiet was suffocating, like a constant reminder of what I had lost. Now, it felt different, more like a fresh start, a rebirth, although it came with a price. I had left behind the life I'd known, the family I'd worked so hard to build, but in some strange way, it felt like the right thing to do. I spent the mornings unpacking the few belongings I had brought with me. There wasn't much, a few shirts, socks, a couple of books, and my old leather journal. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The apartment wasn't much either. The walls were bare, the furniture modest, but it was all mine, no one else's. I wasn't beholden to anyone anymore, and for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. I had always been a provider, a fixer. My entire identity had been built on the idea that I was the one people could count on. I paid for Emma's college. I bought her first car. I co-signed on her mortgage when she and Tom bought their house. I thought that's what fathers did, sacrifice for their children's futures. But I was starting to see it differently now. All that giving, all that supporting, it had come at a cost. I hadn't just sacrificed money or time. I had sacrificed my sense of self, my peace of mind. I had allowed myself to become a doormat. It wasn't that I resented helping them. I wanted them to succeed, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that it wasn't my responsibility to carry them. I wasn't their bank account or their safety net. I was their father, and I deserved to be treated with respect. But when Emma and Tom gave me that ultimatum, they had crossed a line. They no longer saw me as a father, as someone to care for and honor. They saw me as a tool, a source of income to help them live the life they thought they were entitled to. I thought about what had led me to this point. The years of working overtime at the bank, the long hours away from home, the times Martha would sit up late waiting for me to come home. She'd always say, "You're working too much, George. You need to take care of yourself." But I never listened. I always thought the next paycheck, the next bonus, the next big thing would finally be the one where I could relax, where I could finally sit back and enjoy the fruits of my labor. But it never came. The more I gave, the more they took, and I never set boundaries. I had always been afraid that if I didn't give, if I didn't sacrifice, they wouldn't love me. It sounds pathetic, I know, but that was my truth. Martha had always understood me, but even she couldn't help me see that my self-worth shouldn't be tied to what I provided for others. It was a hard lesson to learn, but I was finally beginning to understand it. And while I was still processing all of it, the weight I'd been carrying for so many years started to lift. I didn't have to be the one who kept everyone afloat anymore. I didn't have to keep putting myself last. A week had passed since I left, and still no word from Tom. But Emma? She called. She called a lot. I had 18 missed calls, 18 messages, each one more frantic than the last. The first few messages were casual, almost like nothing had happened. "Dad, is everything okay? I haven't heard from you." Then came the panic. "Dad, why aren't you answering? I need to know you're all right." The last few messages were filled with desperation. "Please, Dad, I need you. Tom's business is falling apart and I don't know what to do. We need your help." I didn't reply. I couldn't. It wasn't about whether or not I cared. It was about standing firm in the decision I had made. I had always been the one to fix things, but I couldn't fix this. I couldn't fix their choices. One night, I sat down with my laptop and started looking through old financial records. I'd kept track of everything over the years, meticulously noting all the payments I had made for Emma and Tom. Tuition, wedding expenses, mortgage payments, car insurance, you name it. I had paid it. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been carrying them for far too long. I dialed the bank, my fingers shaking as I requested a statement for their mortgage account. My stomach dropped when I saw the balance. It wasn't just the mortgage payments. There were credit card payments, utilities, everything I had been paying without question. I had funded their entire life, and they had taken it for granted. That's when I made the decision. I couldn't let them continue to drain me, both financially and emotionally. I called my lawyer the next morning and started the process of filing for eviction. I wasn't going to let Tom keep using my house as collateral for his failed business. I wasn't going to let Emma continue to think that I would bail her out every time things got hard. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel relieved either. But I knew it was the right thing to do. It was the only way to stop the cycle, to make sure I wasn't going to keep getting used. I had spent so many years trying to keep everyone happy, trying to be the perfect father, and all it had done was leave me empty. As I sat there staring at the screen, I realized that for the first time in years, I was finally doing something for myself. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I wasn't just standing up to them. I was standing up to myself. I was choosing my own well-being over their demands. And as much as it hurt, as much as I missed my daughter, I knew it was the only way forward. I finished my coffee and closed my laptop, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. There was no going back now. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after filing for eviction were some of the most uncertain, and in some ways, the most liberating of my life. I spent the first few nights in my apartment replaying every interaction with Emma and Tom, every instance where I'd been taken for granted, where I'd bent over backward to please them, and still ended up feeling like an outsider in my own home. But there was one thought that kept me grounded through all the confusion and the guilt. I was doing what I needed to do. I was choosing myself. I hadn't heard from Emma since our last conversation, and that was both a relief and a source of discomfort. I had spent years being the provider, the fixer, the person they could count on no matter what. Now, the silence was deafening. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, and I'd glance down to see her name on the screen. I'd tell myself not to answer, but then a part of me, one that still cared deeply about her, wondered if maybe this time it would be different. Maybe she would apologize. Maybe she would finally see how much I had sacrificed for her, for them. But every time, I ignored the call. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to that place where I was constantly being used and undervalued. Not again. But it wasn't just Emma I had to worry about. It was Tom. I had been avoiding his calls too, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he would show up at my door, demanding to know why I was doing this to them. I wasn't afraid of him, though. Not anymore. I had spent years letting him walk all over me, letting him get away with the kind of behavior that should never have been tolerated. He had no respect for me, and he had no respect for the hard work I had put into everything I had, everything that he and Emma had taken advantage of. I had allowed him to manipulate me into thinking that I was the problem, that I was the one causing the tension in their marriage. But that wasn't true. I had been the one carrying all the weight while they sat back and let me do the heavy lifting. A few days later, my phone rang again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. My gut told me it was Tom, but I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to hear whatever excuse he had prepared for his behavior, whatever lie he was going to try to sell me. But I couldn't help myself. I checked the voicemail after the call ended. "George, it's Tom. We need to talk. This isn't the way to handle things. Emma's been really upset, and I know you're upset too. We can work this out. I'll come by tomorrow to discuss things. Please pick up the phone." His voice was laced with false sincerity, the kind of tone I had heard so many times before, but this time it didn't work. I wasn't going to give him the chance to manipulate me again. I deleted the voicemail and tossed my phone onto the couch. I knew the eviction notice was the right thing to do. It was the only way to break free from the financial hold they had over me, the emotional manipulation that had shaped my entire relationship with them. But there was still a part of me that was unsettled. Part of me still wanted to believe that family meant unconditional support, that it wasn't supposed to be transactional. I had given everything to them, my time, my money, my health, and yet they still acted like it wasn't enough. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I left my apartment, making my way down the street toward the lake. The air was crisp, the sun low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the water. I always loved the lake. It had a way of soothing me, making me feel small in the grand scheme of things. As I walked along the shore, I thought about everything I had lost, everything I had given up to make my family happy. I thought about the years I spent working overtime at the bank, missing out on time with my wife, missing out on time with Emma when she was growing up. I thought about the moments I had sacrificed to be the person they needed me to be, and how little I had asked for in return. I stopped walking and sat down on a bench, staring out at the lake. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had given away until now. I had allowed them to take more than they should have. I had allowed my identity to be wrapped up in what I could provide, in what I could do for others. And now it felt like I was starting to rediscover who I was, separate from them. But then, just as the calm was starting to settle in, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Emma. "Dad, please, we need to talk. Tom and I are both really sorry. I've made so many mistakes and I don't know what to do without you. Please come home." I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart ached for her, for the little girl I used to know, the one who used to look up at me with such trust. But that girl was gone. The woman who had sent me that message wasn't the same person. I had to remind myself that Emma, too, had crossed a line. She had allowed Tom's manipulation to blind her to the truth. She had chosen his side over mine, and that choice had consequences. I didn't respond. Instead, I put my phone in my pocket and sat back, letting the cool breeze wash over me. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to go back to the way things were. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like I was finally walking in the right direction. The next day, I made another call. This time, it was to my lawyer. I asked him to fast-track the paperwork for the eviction, to make sure everything was set in stone. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Emma or Tom. It was about protecting myself, setting boundaries that I had neglected for too long. Later that afternoon, Emma called again. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. Instead, I focused on the future. My future. It was a future that didn't include endless sacrifices for people who didn't value me. It was a future where I could be free of the emotional weight I had carried for so long. As the days passed, the weight of the decision started to feel lighter. Emma kept calling, and I kept ignoring it. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. Not now. Not after everything. The next time I heard from her, it was a letter in the mail. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. "I'm sorry for everything, Dad. I don't know how I lost my way, but I want to find my way back. Please, when you're ready, I'm here." For the first time, I let myself feel a glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation, not yet, but for something more important. Change. For both of us. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and went for another walk. This time the sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I felt like the weight was finally lifting. I woke up the next morning to the sound of rain tapping against my window. It was a strange, soothing sound that made the world feel quieter, smaller, more contained. I had never been one for gloomy days, but there was something about this rain that made me feel like I could finally breathe again, as though the weight of the past few weeks was lifting, if only a little bit. It had been 2 weeks since I filed the eviction papers. 2 weeks since I had truly begun to break free from the role I had played for far too long. I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, making sure their lives were smooth and easy, that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. As I sat at my small kitchen table, sipping my coffee, my mind wandered back to the past, to the years of quiet sacrifices and the constant tension that had hung over my family. Every decision I had made, every choice I had made, had been for them. Emma, Tom, Martha. I had spent so much time being the provider, the rock, the fixer, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be my own person. My own needs, my own wants, had been pushed aside for years, buried under layers of obligation and guilt. But now, sitting in my apartment, I was finally starting to feel like I was breathing again. The phone buzzed on the table, breaking my reverie. Emma's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a few moments, unsure if I was ready to pick up. The last time we had spoken, it had been brief, just a quick emotional text saying she was sorry, that she was starting to see things differently. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hadn't responded to her calls, and I hadn't gone back to the house. I wasn't ready yet. Part of me still felt like I had to hold my ground. I had given so much of myself to her, to Tom, to everyone around me, that I needed to make sure I wasn't just going to fall back into the old patterns. I didn't pick up. Instead, I got up and went to the window, watching the rain fall, feeling it mirror the unsettled emotions inside me. The guilt still lingered, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been. I had done what I had to do for both my sake and theirs. I couldn't keep enabling them. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The phone rang again, and once more, I let it go to voicemail. Emma left another message, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Dad, please, I need to talk to you. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to fix this. I need you. We need you." I sat down again at the table, my fingers tapping on the surface as I listened to the message. The words hit me hard. They were genuine. I could tell that much. She was hurting, and I couldn't deny that part of me wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I knew better now. I couldn't be the one to fix everything. I couldn't be the one to always step in and make it all right. The phone sat silently on the table as the rain continued to fall outside. I couldn't avoid this forever. I knew that. But it wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my own life and my own sense of self. The next day I got up early and went for a walk around town. I had grown fond of these walks, the quiet time alone with my thoughts. I wasn't running from my emotions anymore, wasn't trying to bury them beneath work or obligations. I was allowing myself to feel everything: anger, regret, relief, and it felt freeing. As I walked, I passed familiar spots. The diner on Main Street where Martha and I used to sit for coffee, the park where Emma had played as a child, the bank where I'd spent so many hours working, building the career that had supported all of us. These places were etched into my memory, reminders of who I had been. But now I was starting to see them differently. They weren't just symbols of my past. They were part of the road that had led me here, to this moment of clarity, this moment of freedom. When I got back to my apartment, I found myself sitting at the desk, staring at the phone. Emma had left several more messages, each one growing more urgent. I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. I had to face her, had to find out what kind of relationship we could have moving forward. I dialed her number. "Hello?" Her voice was tentative, like she wasn't sure if I was really going to pick up. "Emma," I said, my voice steady. "I've been listening to your messages." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I've messed things up, and I don't expect you to just forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong, Tom was wrong, and I see that now." I paused, letting her words sink in. "I know you're sorry, Emma, but it's not just about that. It's about what you're going to do moving forward." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out what went wrong, and I realize now that I've been taking you for granted for a long time. I want to fix this, Dad. I want to be better." I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to reach out and say everything would be okay, but I had learned the hard way that words weren't enough. She had to show me, just like I had to show myself, that things could change. "Emma," I said, my voice softening. "You've got a long way to go, but I'm glad to hear you're doing something about it. But it's going to take time. We can't just go back to the way things were, not yet." "I understand, Dad," she said quietly. "I just want a chance to make things right, a chance to prove that I can do better." I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my chest ease. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. "Okay, let's take it one step at a time." As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I wasn't ready to welcome Emma back with open arms, but this was a step in the right direction. A chance both to heal, to rebuild what we had lost. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I walked over to the window again, looking out at the rain-soaked streets. The world was quiet, still, but I knew that change was coming. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the right path. The days that followed that phone call were some of the hardest, and yet some of the most freeing I had experienced. I spent a lot of time thinking about what Emma had said, about the therapy she was going through, and the effort she was putting into understanding the damage she had caused, not just to me, but to herself too. Part of me wanted to believe that things could go back to the way they were. I wanted to forgive her, to let go of all the hurt I had carried for so long, but I also knew better. The truth was I had been holding on to resentment for years, and forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed, no matter how much I wanted to ease the tension between us. I had always been the fixer, the one who made things right, who kept the peace. But now I was learning that fixing everything wasn't my responsibility. It had never been. Emma had to take the first step, and while I could support her, I couldn't do the work for her anymore. She had to figure out her own path, just as I was figuring out mine. It was a Saturday morning when I decided to finally sort through my old files, things I had neglected over the years in favor of helping others. My bank statements, investment portfolios, old receipts and tax documents. They were all piled up in a corner of the small closet in my apartment. As I started sorting through the papers, I felt the weight of my past decisions heavy on my shoulders. For the first time in ages, I wasn't just seeing numbers and figures. I was seeing years of my life, years that had been spent focused on everyone else, leaving little room for myself. There was a certain finality in that moment, a feeling of liberation as I shredded old documents, clearing the space that I had allowed to be filled with so much clutter. I wasn't just cleaning out my apartment, I was cleaning out my mind, letting go of old habits, old mistakes, old versions of myself that no longer served me. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I had cleared most of the piles, and the apartment felt a little lighter, a little less burdened. The rain from the morning had cleared, and I walked to the window to look outside. The air was cool, crisp, and fresh, much like the feeling that had started to grow inside of me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. As I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a message from Emma. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot. About everything. I'm ready to meet. I know it's been a while, but I hope we can talk soon." My heart skipped a beat. I had been waiting for this moment. It wasn't that I hadn't been open to talking to her, but I needed to be sure she was ready for the conversation, ready to face what had happened, not just apologize, but understand why I had to make the decisions I did. I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. I had to approach this with patience. There was no rushing it. I decided to reply, but I didn't rush my words. I didn't want this to be another emotional conversation that led nowhere. I wanted it to be real, honest. "I think we're ready for a conversation too. Let's meet at the diner tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. I'll be there." The message was brief, but it felt like a turning point. I wasn't asking for her to fix everything right away. I wasn't asking for promises that couldn't be kept. I was asking for honesty. For the first time in years, I was asking for something that wasn't based on obligation or guilt, but on the truth. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept tossing and turning, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that was still left unsaid. I wondered if Emma was truly ready for what was coming, if she had fully grasped the weight of her actions. I had spent so long protecting her from the truth, from the consequences of her choices. But now, that wasn't my role anymore. The next morning, I made my way to the diner. It wasn't a long walk from my apartment, just a few blocks, but it gave me time to gather my thoughts. As I walked, I found myself replaying old memories of Emma, memories from when she was a child, when she would curl up next to me after a long day, her small body seeking comfort. I had always been there for her, always made sure she felt safe and loved. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I needed that too. I needed safety and love, just like everyone else. When I arrived, I saw her sitting in a booth by the window. She looked different, older, more worn, but still with that familiar glint of sincerity in her eyes. It was the same glint I had seen when she was a little girl, when she would try to convince me to let her stay up late to watch just one more episode of her favourite show. It was a glimmer of hope. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. We sat there for a moment in silence, not knowing exactly where to start. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice hesitant. She looked down at her hands, nervously fidgeting with the napkin in front of her. "I've been better," I replied honestly, "but I'm getting there." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I never realized how much I had taken from you. You gave everything, and I never even stopped to think about it." I wanted to reach out and comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't go back to the way things were. This time, things had to change for both of us. "You're right, Emma," I said gently. "You've taken a lot from me, and I let you. I let you because I thought that's what a father was supposed to do. But I've learned that I can't keep doing that anymore. I can't keep giving everything and getting nothing in return." She looked up at me, tears falling freely now. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Dad. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to be better. I promise I'll do the work if you'll let me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her, truly saw her. Not as the child I had always protected, but as an adult who was capable of understanding the consequences of her actions. And in that moment I knew that we were both on the road to healing, even if it was a long and difficult journey. "I'm willing to try, Emma," I said, my voice softening. "But it's going to take time, and it's going to take honesty. We can't go back to the way things were, but maybe we can build something new, something real." She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her in a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It was enough. As we sat there, talking about everything and nothing, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was progress. And progress, I realized, was all I needed. The weeks that followed that first conversation with Emma were a mix of small victories and hard lessons. The road to rebuilding our relationship wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it, but it felt different this time. There was no rushing, no pretending everything was fine. We were both walking through the fog, trying to find our way out, step by step. I could feel the weight of the past starting to lift, but it wasn't gone yet. I had to stay vigilant, stay firm in the decisions I'd made, and not fall back into old habits. The first few days after our meeting at the diner were quiet. Emma called me every couple of days, and we kept the conversations simple, about work, about her therapy, about life. It felt like we were testing the waters, seeing if the silence between us could be filled with something other than guilt and unspoken resentment. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to fill that space for her. She was doing the work on her own. She was taking responsibility, and that was enough. One evening, a few weeks later, Emma asked me to meet her again. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot," she said over the phone, her voice tentative but determined. "I want to talk more about what happened. I don't want to just pretend like it never did. I think it's important we both say everything we need to say." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I had been bracing myself for this moment, the moment when we would really have to face what had happened between us, when the real hurt would come to the surface. It wasn't going to be pretty. I knew that. But I also knew that if we were ever going to move forward, we had to face it. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in town. When I arrived, Emma was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked tired, more than I had seen her in a while, but there was something different in her eyes. A vulnerability, maybe. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see the hesitation in her face. She wasn't sure how to start, and neither was I. "Hey," I said, sitting down across from her. "How've you been?" I've been okay," she said, her voice soft. "A little better. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, about everything I've put you through." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. It was easy to say things like "I'm sorry" or "I've been thinking," but the weight of those words was different when you really meant them. And I could tell she did. She wasn't just apologizing to check a box or ease her own guilt. She was genuinely owning what had happened. "Emma," I started, trying to find the right words. I've been thinking a lot too. About what I did, about how I let myself get caught up in your life in a way that wasn't healthy. I didn't set boundaries, and I let you take advantage of me. But I also think I've been holding on to some of my own bitterness about it, and I don't want that to be the thing that defines our relationship anymore. She nodded, and I could see her eyes water. I get that, Dad. I really do. I know I took advantage of you. And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. But I think I was just trying to fill the emptiness in my own life, and I didn't even realize how much it was costing you. I didn't see it until now. I swallowed hard, trying to fight the lump in my throat. I had spent so many years trying to protect her, trying to make things right for her, that I had never stopped to think about what it was doing to me. I had become so focused on being her provider, her support, that I lost myself in the process. And it wasn't just my fault. She had taken advantage, yes, but I had allowed it. We were both responsible in our own ways. I didn't see it either, I said quietly, but I'm starting to, and that's why I had to make a change. I couldn't keep being the one who fixed everything. I couldn't keep giving myself away. I had to step back, even though it hurt, even though it felt like I was losing you. Emma wiped her eyes, her voice cracking as she spoke. I'm sorry I made you feel that way, Dad. I know I was selfish, and I wasn't thinking about how much you were sacrificing for me. I thought you would always be there to catch me when I fell, and I didn't stop to think about how that would affect you. But I see it now. I really do. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the conversation settle between us. I wasn't sure what to say next. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her, that everything was going to be okay, but I also knew that forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed. It was something that needed to be earned, not just said. I'm proud of you, Emma, I said, my voice steady. You're doing the hard work, and I can see that. I know it's not easy, and I'm not going to pretend like everything's fine, but I think we're on the right path, and that's all we can ask for. She looked at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Thank you, Dad. That means more to me than you know. I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, hope. We weren't done, not by a long shot, but we were moving forward. We were starting to rebuild, to repair the cracks that had formed over the years. And that, I realized, was enough. The rest of the conversation was quiet, reflective. We talked about the future, about the things we both needed to work on, but we didn't get into the past anymore. It wasn't time for that yet. What mattered now was the effort, the work, the willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful. As I left the coffee shop, I felt lighter, as though a small weight had been lifted from my chest. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a step in the right direction. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the road to something better. Not just for me, but for Emma too. The journey was just beginning, and while I knew it wouldn't be easy, I was ready for it. We both were. A few days after my meeting with Emma at the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. It wasn't a huge transformation, but it was enough to notice. She was putting in the effort. I could see it in her actions, the way she had started to prioritize her own well-being. She was keeping her therapy appointments, reaching out to people she trusted, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking to me to fix everything. It wasn't easy to let go of the role I had played in her life for so long, but as I saw her taking responsibility, I started to realize that my role wasn't to fix her anymore. It was to be a father, to be a guide, not a crutch. But with that realization came a new kind of emptiness, one that I wasn't entirely prepared for. My whole life, I had defined myself by my ability to provide, to fix, to give without asking for anything in return. Now that Emma was starting to stand on her own, I was faced with a question I hadn't really thought about before. Who was I, if I wasn't the one who kept everything together? I spent a lot of nights alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. It was the kind of quiet that used to suffocate me, but now it was just quiet, peaceful, in a way I'd never experienced before. I thought about Martha, about how she had always encouraged me to take a step back, to enjoy life for once. I had spent so many years putting off my own happiness, convincing myself that my worth came from what I could do for others. Now it was time to find a new sense of purpose, one that didn't rely on constant sacrifice. I started taking walks in the morning, something I hadn't done in years. I used to walk with Martha all the time, especially in the early mornings when the streets were still empty. We'd talk about anything and everything. Work, life, our hopes for the future, the small things that seemed insignificant at the time but meant everything to us. I missed those walks, the way we'd talk without interruptions, the way we could just be together without needing to fill the silence with anything other than our own thoughts. I wasn't trying to replace Martha, but walking alone brought a new kind of peace, a reminder that I was still here, still moving forward, even without her by my side. And with each step, I realized that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking on my own terms, making my own decisions. As the weeks went on, Emma and I continued to meet up, though our conversations were less frequent now. It wasn't that we were drifting apart, but we were both beginning to live our own lives. There was no rush to force something that wasn't ready. She was still figuring things out, still working through the fallout of everything that had happened, and I was doing the same. One afternoon, she called me out of the blue. "Dad, I've been thinking about everything." Her voice sounded different, more sure of itself, as though she had finally found some clarity. "I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm getting there. I want to make things right with you. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know I can't change the past, but I want to move forward with you. I'm ready to be a daughter again, not just someone who takes and takes." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of relief. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She wasn't looking for approval. She was just speaking the truth. It was the truth I had been waiting to hear. "Emma," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I've always wanted you to be better than I was. To live a life that's not defined by mistakes, but by growth. I'm proud of you. But I need to be honest with you too. I can't go back to how things were. We both need to keep moving forward, and I'm willing to take those steps with you, but we can't do it all at once. It'll take time." "I know, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "I understand. I'm not asking for everything at once. But I want you to know I'm here and I'm committed to making this right. I want to be part of your life, the real version of it, not just when it's convenient." We talked for a while longer, and the conversation felt lighter. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But it felt real. And for the first time, it felt like we were finally speaking the same language, one built on honesty and mutual respect. As I hung up the phone, I sat quietly for a moment, letting her words settle. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about me too. It was about rebuilding not just the relationship I had with her, but with myself. It was about finding balance between giving and receiving, about learning to be a father without losing myself in the process. The next day, I made another decision. I started looking into volunteer work, something I had never considered before. I had always been too focused on my own family to think about giving back to the community. But now, with so much time on my hands and so much to give, I realized I wanted to help others in ways I hadn't before. I contacted a local organization that worked with underprivileged youth, offering my time to mentor. It wasn't a big commitment, but it was something that felt meaningful. As I walked to my first meeting with the group, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for so long. I wasn't defined by what I could provide for my family anymore. I was defined by my ability to make a difference, no matter how small in someone else's life. And as I walked into the room, meeting the kids who were there looking for guidance, I realized that this was what I had been missing all along. Not just giving for the sake of giving, but giving because I had something meaningful to share, something that didn't come with strings attached. It felt good. It felt right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that was truly mine. Things weren't perfect with Emma, and I didn't expect them to be anytime soon. But I was starting to understand that sometimes the road to healing isn't straight. It's full of bumps, detours, and moments of uncertainty, but it's the only road worth walking. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the right path. It had been a couple of months since my conversation with Emma at the coffee shop, and things had definitely changed, though not in the way I had originally imagined. The road to rebuilding our relationship was still long, but for the first time in a while I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. Emma had continued her therapy, and every time we spoke, I could hear the difference in her voice. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was doing the work, actively trying to be a better person, not just for me, but for herself. I had decided that I needed to keep moving forward too. I couldn't just sit back and wait for things to get better. I had spent years letting others dictate my sense of worth, my sense of purpose. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't just the fixer. I was a person with my own dreams, my own desires, my own life to live. So when I started volunteering at the youth organization, it felt like the first step in truly reclaiming who I was. I didn't want to be the man who lived his life through others anymore. I wanted to find my own meaning, my own purpose, even if it took time to figure out exactly what that was. I had been mentoring a young man named Chris, a 16-year-old with a difficult home life. He was quiet at first, but over time, he started opening up to me. He had this natural intelligence that was buried beneath layers of cynicism and distrust, the result of too many broken promises and disappointments. He reminded me of myself when I was younger, quiet, unsure, and trying to figure out how the world worked. I saw a bit of myself in him, and it pushed me to be a better version of myself too. One afternoon, after our session, Chris asked if he could talk to me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the uncertainty that often comes with sharing something deeply personal. "Mr. Bennett," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've been saying, about the stuff with family and how to deal with all the mess." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I just don't get it. You know, like how you can still care about people who've hurt you. I don't know if I can do that." I sat across from him, letting his words settle. I'd heard the same thing from Emma, the same uncertainty about how to rebuild relationships once the trust had been broken. It wasn't an easy question to answer. "Chris," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not going to lie to you. It's not easy. Forgiveness, trust, it's something you have to earn. But you can't carry the weight of other people's mistakes forever. You have to let go for your own peace." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the uncertainty mixing with curiosity. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was the truth. The next few weeks were a blur of sessions, phone calls, and new experiences. Emma and I had started seeing each other more often, though our conversations were still slow, deliberate. She wasn't asking for anything from me anymore. She was simply showing up, and that was enough. We'd talk about her progress in therapy, about her challenges with Tom, and sometimes about the future. She'd been staying with a friend, taking some time for herself before she made any major decisions about her marriage. I was proud of her for taking that step. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wasn't something she was doing lightly. One evening, Emma called me, sounding more unsure than I had heard her in a long time. "Dad, can we talk?" I could tell she was holding something back, and my heart tightened. "Of course, Emma. What's going on?" I don't know what to do. Tom and I talked, and he's asking me to come back. He's saying he's changed, that he's working on himself. And I don't know if I believe him, but I also don't know if I can keep living like this. I'm so lost, Dad. I don't know where to go from here. I listened carefully, knowing this wasn't a simple question, and it certainly wasn't something I could answer for her. "Emma," I said softly, "I know this isn't easy, but whatever you decide, I want you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to rush this. Take the time you need to figure out what's right for you. And remember, being true to yourself is the most important thing you can do. You've been through a lot, and you deserve to be happy." "I know," she said quietly, "but I don't know what happiness looks like anymore." I stayed quiet for a moment, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew she needed space to figure this out. "Emma, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that you've come a long way. You're stronger than you realize, and no matter what, I'm here for you. Take your time, okay?" She thanked me, and we ended the call. As I sat there, I realized how far we had both come. There was still a lot of work to be done, but I could see the growth in her, the small steps she was taking toward healing. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it was progress. The next morning, I got up early and took a walk by the lake, the same place I had walked so many times over the past few months. The quiet of the morning, the mist rising off the water, felt like a balm for my soul. I had spent so many years trying to keep everyone else happy, trying to be the one who made everything work, that I had neglected to take care of myself. But now I was starting to understand that I wasn't defined by what I gave to others. I wasn't just the fixer. I was a person with my own worth, my own future to build. As I walked along the shore, the weight of everything that had happened over the past year started to feel more like a memory than a constant burden. I was still learning, still figuring out who I was outside of my role as a provider, as a father who had always been there to catch his family when they fell. But I was starting to understand that the only person I could truly rely on to catch me, to give me peace, was myself. When I returned home, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. The phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Emma. "I've made a decision. I think I know what I need to do." I smiled to myself, knowing that whatever choice she had made, it was hers to make. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The path ahead was still unclear, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was walking forward, and so was she. A few weeks passed, and I found myself at a crossroads. Emma had kept her word. She had continued to work on herself, kept her therapy appointments, and, most importantly, had started taking ownership of her decisions. The walls that had stood between us for so long were slowly beginning to crumble, though it wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to bear. There were still times when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether the distance I had put between myself and my family was permanent or just a temporary escape from the mess we had all created. But in the midst of all the uncertainty, something incredible happened. Emma called me one afternoon, her voice more sure than I had heard it in a long time. "Dad," she said, "I've made my decision." I was immediately alert, my heart rate picking up, unsure of what to expect. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "I've decided to file for divorce," she said, her voice steady, but there was a quiet resolve beneath her words that I hadn't expected. "I've thought about it for a while, and I know it's the right thing. I've spent so much of my life trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I've been carrying Tom's burdens, believing that I was somehow responsible for his happiness. But I'm not. I need to put myself first, Dad." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Emma," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I'm proud of you. I know this wasn't an easy decision, but it's yours, and that's what matters." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Emma spoke again, softer this time. "I didn't think I could do it, Dad. I thought I was trapped. But I've learned that I don't have to stay stuck, and I don't need someone else to validate me. I can be enough on my own." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to reach out and tell her it would all be okay, that everything would work out in the end. But I knew that wasn't what she needed. She didn't need promises or empty reassurances. She needed to hear that I understood her, that I supported her even in the hardest of decisions. "You've always been enough, Emma," I said softly, my voice shaking just a little. "And I'm here for you, no matter what." We stayed on the phone for a while longer, talking about her plans and the steps she was going to take. I could hear the relief in her voice, the sense of empowerment that had replaced the uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I had been afraid that she would make the wrong decision, that she would stay in a situation that would only hurt her more. But now I could see that she was learning to make her own choices, to live for herself, not for anyone else's expectations. When we hung up, I sat back in my chair and let the quiet of the apartment settle around me. I had spent so many years trying to fix things for other people, trying to make them happy, that I had forgotten how to make myself happy. But now, as I thought about Emma's decision, I realized something important. Healing doesn't happen in the way we expect it to. It doesn't come in perfect, neat packages. It comes in fits and starts, in messy, imperfect moments. And that was okay. The next few days were a blur of activity. Emma moved forward with her divorce filing, and though I knew it wasn't easy, I was proud of how she handled it. I could see the strength she had been hiding all these years, the resilience that had always been there, just buried under the weight of guilt and obligation. I couldn't help but think about how far we had come, how much had changed in such a short time. But while Emma was finding her way, I was still trying to figure out mine. I had spent so much time focused on her, on Tom, on the past, that I hadn't really taken the time to think about what I wanted next. It wasn't that I hadn't made plans. Getting involved with the youth mentoring program had given me a sense of purpose I hadn't expected, but I knew that I needed to do more than just keep busy. I needed to look forward, not just back. I decided to start taking some trips. I didn't want to rush into anything permanent, but I knew I needed to see the world again. Martha and I had talked about traveling when we retired, but those plans never came to fruition. And now, I had the chance to make them my own. I started small, taking a weekend trip to the coast. It wasn't far, but it was enough to remind me that there was more to life than the routine I had been stuck in. The ocean was vast, endless, and it made me realize just how small my fears had been in the grand scheme of things. The trips became a way for me to reconnect with myself, to remind myself that I still had the capacity for adventure, for joy, for new experiences. It was a way for me to step out of the shadow of my past and into the sunlight of my own future. Each trip, each new experience, helped me peel away the layers of doubt and guilt that had clung to me for so long. And little by little, I started to feel like I was becoming a new version of myself, the version that had always been there, just waiting to be rediscovered. I didn't tell Emma about the trips at first. I didn't want her to think I was trying to move on too quickly or that I was abandoning her in the process. But one evening, as we talked on the phone, I mentioned the weekend trip I had just returned from. She was excited for me, but there was a note of concern in her voice. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her tone soft. "I mean, I know things are different now, but you don't have to do everything alone. You've got me, and I'm here, even if it's just to talk." "I know, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "But this is something I need to do. I need to remember who I am, not just who I've been for everyone else. And it feels good, you know, to be able to take a step back and think about what I want, instead of just worrying about what everyone else needs from me." There was a pause, and then she spoke, her voice more certain than I had ever heard it. "I get that, Dad, and I'm proud of you. You've spent your whole life making sure everyone else was okay. It's time you took care of yourself too." It was the first time in a long time that I truly believed her. She wasn't just saying it because she felt obligated. She meant it. And in that moment I realized something important. I wasn't just healing for myself. I was healing for her, for all the years I had spent trying to be someone I thought she needed. But now we both understood that I didn't need to fix everything. I just needed to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Looking back on everything, I realized that the path I've walked was never about reaching a destination. It was about the journey itself. The years of sacrifice, the guilt, the moments where I thought I was giving everything to my family, only to find that I had lost myself along the way. It was all part of the process. But that process didn't have to define me. I didn't have to stay stuck in the role I had created for myself as the fixer, the provider, the one who always put others first. Somewhere along the way, I learned that I didn't need to lose myself in order to love and care for others. I could love them, but I also needed to love myself. When I made the decision to step back from the relationships that had consumed so much of my energy, I thought it was going to be the hardest thing I had ever done. And in many ways, it was. Letting go of my role in Emma's life, my constant attempts to fix everything for her and for Tom, was a painful but necessary step. It wasn't about abandoning them. It was about creating space for both of us to grow. I had to let her find her own way, just as I had to find mine. The first months after my decision were full of uncertainty and self-doubt, but they were also full of discovery. I began to understand that I didn't need to live in the shadow of my past mistakes. I didn't need to be defined by the choices I had made for others. I could choose to redefine my life step by step, and that choice gave me more peace than I ever thought possible. When Emma called me that day, telling me she had filed for divorce and was finally taking control of her life, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Not because she had made a difficult choice, but because she was taking responsibility for her own happiness. It wasn't about blaming anyone anymore. It was about moving forward. We were both learning to let go of the past and embrace the future, together but not defined by each other's mistakes. I know our relationship isn't perfect, and I don't expect it to be. Healing takes time, and so does rebuilding trust. But the difference now is that we both understand the importance of self-respect and boundaries. We can love each other without losing ourselves in the process. And for the first time in years, I feel like I've finally found a sense of balance in my life. In the end, it wasn't about fixing everything. It was about understanding that some things, some people can't be fixed. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. We learn, we grow, and we move forward. The journey may never be smooth, but it's mine to walk. And I'm walking it with more peace, more purpose, and more hope than I ever thought possible. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm ready for whatever comes next. Because, for the first time in a long time, I'm finally living for myself. And that feels like everything. In life, it's easy to get caught up in the role we think we're supposed to play, whether as a provider, fixer, or someone who always puts others first. But the most important thing you can do for yourself and those you love is to set healthy boundaries. You don't have to sacrifice your peace, happiness, or sense of self for anyone. Healing and growth require acknowledging your worth and taking responsibility for your own happiness. While it's natural to want to help those you care about, remember that true support comes from empowering others to stand on their own, not by constantly doing the work for them. It's also crucial to know when to let go, whether of toxic relationships, old patterns, or past mistakes. Forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting or returning to the way things were. It means accepting that you can't change the past, but you can control how you move forward. Take the time to rediscover yourself, pursue your own passions, and create a life that brings you fulfillment. The journey may not be easy, but embracing your own growth and letting go of what holds you back is the first step toward living an authentic and peaceful life.